I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
We are on the precipice of a catastrophe.
Calls from members of the UN Security Council to step up efforts to avert a wider Middle East conflict after Hamas's political leader is killed on Iranian soil. Warnings of a dire humanitarian situation in Sudan as UN officials detail the daily struggles of millions forced to flee the ongoing conflict between armed groups.
It was important to build a compact, he called it, between the private sector and the United Nations, and hence the Global Compact was born.
And bringing together the UN and business community to meet the needs of the future. A conversation about the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. Next on UN Insider.
Diplomatic efforts to change the trajectory and seek a path toward regional peace and stability are urgently needed. Communication by means of missiles, armed drones, and other deadly attacks must end. I echo the Secretary General's call for all to vigorously work toward regional de-escalation in the interest of long-term peace and stability for all.
Increasing tensions and the possibility of a wider regional conflict in the Middle East sparked an emergency Security Council session this week. It followed a strike that killed Hamas's political leader on Iranian soil and a strike in Beirut that killed a key Hezbollah figure. Judija is monitoring developments inside the UN and has more on our top story. Dija.
Well, it's summer, when the UN headquarters should enjoy the quietest period of time of the year. However, the recent development in Middle East has made this week quite busy. On Wednesday, requested by China, Algeria, and Russia, Security Council had an emergency meeting on the attacks in Tehran and South Beirut. Most of the Security Council members believed these are dangerous developments that might ignite the whole region and drag countries into a full-blown war, and expressed their concerns. And relative countries or countries in the region, namely Algeria, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, all condemned the attacks. The U.S. Deputy Representative, Ambassador Robert Wood, rather blamed Iran with a cautious tone.
Israel has a right to defend itself against attacks from Hezbollah and other terrorists. That is precisely what it did on July 30, when it independently responded to Hezbollah's July 28 attack on Majd al-Shams, which killed 12 children. I also want to note that the United States was not involved with Israel's response on July 30 in Lebanon. The United States was not aware of or involved in the apparent death of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Indeed, we have no independent confirmation as to Hamas's claims regarding his death. Indeed, every member of this council should call on Iran to stop arming, advising, and financing terrorist groups, and to rein in the actions of proxies and partners who threaten regional peace and security.
The Iranian representative to the UN ambassador Saeed Iravani replied,
"Their crimes reveal a lack of commitment to peace and stability in the region and suggest an intention to escalate conflict and expand the war through the entire region. The responsibility of the United States as a strategic ally and main supporters of the Israeli regime in the region cannot be overlooked in this horrific crime. The Islamic Republic of Iran reserves its inherent right to self-defense in accordance with international law to respond decisively to this terrorist and criminal act when it deems necessary and appropriate."
Obviously, though Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres is still on vacation, he followed the situation and issued a statement on these incidents.
The Secretary General believes that the attacks we have seen in South Beirut and in Tehran represent a dangerous escalation at a moment in which all efforts should instead be leading to a ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all Israeli hostages, a massive increase in humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza, and a return to calm and across the blue line. Rather than that, what we are seeing are efforts to undermine these goals. The Secretary General has consistently called for maximum restraint by all. It is increasingly clear, however, that restraint alone is insufficient at this extremely sensitive time. The Secretary General urges all to vigorously work towards regional de-escalation in the interest of long-term peace and stability for all.
And my question is, from the UN Secretariat's perspective view, are these attacks violations of sovereignty?
For the two attacks you mentioned, the South Beirut and Tehran, do you think they are a violation of sovereignty?
Well, we've seen the attack in Lebanon being claimed by the Israeli forces. Any attack from one country into another is a violation of sovereignty.
Also, this Monday, Sigrid Kaag, Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, briefed us on the latest situation of humanitarian mechanism in Gaza.
The famous mechanism under Resolution 2720, it's working, it's capturing aid supplies from Jordan, Cyprus, West Bank into Gaza. We're finalizing with Egypt. And as I mentioned before, the monitors are ready to be deployed inside Gaza. They're ready to pick up their visas as they have been approved. But what we need is an immediate and full ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and of course continued access to start to meet the needs, but also really think of a future for Palestinians and Israelis alike in the pursuit of peace.
This August, the Security Council is going to have a new president, Sierra Leone. Let's hope that August will be a cool and calm month. And that's all from me. Elaine.
Shudaja, thanks. The fighting between Israel and Hamas has raged on for 10 months. Tens of thousands have died, hostages are still missing, and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza grows worse by the day.
Somehow people are holding on, but of course we are now in that deathly cycle whereby children are very malnourished, there is immense heat, there is lack of water, there is a horrendous lack of sanitation, and that's the cycle. And on top of that, of course, there is a very, very active conflict.
UN officials are stressing the urgent need for a ceasefire to get more aid into Gaza. UNICEF and the WHO are increasingly concerned about a rise in hepatitis cases and a potential polio outbreak. The virus has been detected in wastewater samples. WHO is sending 1 million polio vaccines to the Gaza Strip in hopes of preventing an epidemic. The WHO is also concerned about the number of patients who need medical attention they cannot get inside the Palestinian enclave. 85 sick and injured people were transported to the United Arab Emirates this week, but many more are still in need.
It is really important for everybody to know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. The number of people that need to be medically evacuated outside the Gaza Strip to continue their care are more than 10,000.
Calls for a ceasefire in Sudan grow louder. More than a year of fighting has resulted in a humanitarian crisis that not only impacts Sudan, but many of its neighbors as well.
Security Council members heard of the dire humanitarian situation in Sudan in closed-door consultations on Monday here at the United Nations. The United Kingdom requested the meeting with Council members receiving an update on the ongoing efforts to resolve the crisis. In a separate briefing, the UN's Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator for Sudan, Toby Howard, detailed the harsh conditions in which Sudanese people are living, with millions of internally displaced people, or IDPs, having fled the conflict between the government and a rebel paramilitary group.
There are many other tens of thousands who have fled, again, earlier battles and earlier conflicts, and they are seeking safety and sanctuary in areas under the control of the Sudan Liberation Army Abdul Wahid faction. The SLA estimates that there are several million IDPs on its territory. We're not able to confirm those figures, but we can confirm that there are certainly hundreds of thousands of recent and long-term IDPs in that region, and the situation is very desperate. Camp leaders in Zelensky informed us that some IDPs survive off tree leaves, grain husks, and groundnut remnants in order to survive.
The United Nations estimates that nearly 26 million people in Sudan are not getting enough to eat. And while officials are doing everything in their power to get aid into these affected areas, the UN says there is a crucial need for more financial support. Only 30% of its $2.7 billion plan to cover humanitarian operations this year has so far been funded. In addition to the hunger, Human Rights Watch reported on Monday that the warring parties in Sudan have engaged in widespread sexual and gender-based violence in the capital, Khartoum. The report, based on interviews with healthcare and social workers, as well as counselors who interacted with hundreds of survivors of sexual violence, they found that women and girls from the ages of 9 through to at least 60 were victims of sexual violence, including rape and gang rape. Another round of ceasefire negotiations between the warring parties is scheduled for August in Switzerland to try and end the suffering. Jody Jacob, CGTN, New York.
Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda.
China is not a creator of the Ukrainian crisis, much less a party to it. However, we have not stood by with folded arms. On the contrary, we have all along insisted on promoting peace and negotiation.
China is urging a political settlement to the conflict in Ukraine, saying the situation occurred against a backdrop of historical complexities. UN officials estimate 42 civilians have been killed and wounded every day since the conflict began over 2 years ago. The UN's Emergency Education Fund has allocated $2.5 million to Haiti. A new school year is set to start in September. Officials estimate over 1 million school-aged children are in urgent need of quality education. Ongoing violence has resulted in the closure of hundreds of schools. Dozens are being used to provide shelter for displaced people, while others are occupied by various armed groups and gangs. Several new sites have been added to the UN's Cultural Agency's World Heritage List. UNESCO held its annual meeting in India, adding some 24 properties to the cultural list. New additions include the Beijing Central Axis, a centuries-old example of Chinese urban planning and architecture.
Coming up,
the climate crisis threatens our very, access to resources as well as long-term stability and sustainability.
UN Insider.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The private sector plays a key role in efforts to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. The UN Global Compact brings together more than 20,000 companies to form the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. I sat down with Sanda Ojambo, Assistant Secretary General of the UN Global Compact. Sanda, explain the idea and what is behind UN Global Compact and how it was conceived.
So, the UN Global Compact was formed in the year 2000. Secretary General then was Kofi Annan. If you think back to that time, it was the era of big capital, of structural adjustment in economies, and really just understanding the role that private capital played in the world. And Secretary General Annan thought it was important to build a compact, he called it, between the private sector and the United Nations, and hence the Global Compact was born. But what was different was it was founded on the notion of principles, that there were 10 principles that would be fundamental to ensuring that business was responsible, sustainable, and inclusive.
And in that time, what have you seen? How has it evolved?
It's been amazing. You know, I think when SG Annan was in the room, there were 40 bold leaders who stood forward. You know, our principles are about human rights, labor, the environment, and now anti-corruption. So from a bold group of 40 leaders, 40 businesses, we now stand at about 23,000 businesses over time. The use of the principles has evolved. You know, around the world, people talk a lot more about corporate responsibility or ESG. Over time, we've now integrated working with the Sustainable Development Goals and delivering on them. So public discourse has evolved. Of course, we can do a lot more.
So how do you begin to convince companies to change the way they've done things for years and to think and act more sustainably in line with the Sustainable Development Goals? And what have been the challenges in doing so?
You know, I think if I was to pause and reflect what has been sort of, you know, a breaking point, I'd go back to 4 years ago. I think the COVID pandemic, the climate crisis, the high cost of capital and conflict globally, and I call them the 4 Cs, have really given us reason to pause. And for the private sector, it was an opportunity to reflect on what sustainable business looked like. Because around the world, people reflected on broken global supply chains. What does that look like? People are now reflecting on what happens when there's conflict. How does business and trade work, either when there's conflict in country or between countries? The high cost of capital is really impacting, you know, the ability for both macro large projects as well as, you know, small businesses accessing capital to keep their businesses going. And of course, the climate crisis threatens our very, access to resources as well as long-term stability and sustainability. So in many ways, I don't think we need to convince. The signs are there. You know, we can see the challenges ahead of us. What we need to do more of, perhaps, is ensure that we can develop models that work, show people how principles can really propel your business towards sustainability and competitiveness, and really demonstrate the value of investing in the SDGs, because the SDGs are such a perfect investment opportunity for businesses.
And there's something that you introduced last year called the Faster Forward Initiative, which is all about action and accountability. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you hope to achieve with it?
Yeah, so last year, 2023 September, the UN system took a stock take of where we were on progress with the SDGs. And as you know, we're not on track. And what we did as the UN system was to look at ways in which we could accelerate progress on the SDGs. For the UN Global Compact, we launched the Forward Faster initiative, which was our way of looking at 5, I'll call them force multipliers, 5 areas where the private sector could elevate its engagement in the SDGs and certainly accelerate progress. So the 5 areas for us are gender equality, it's climate, it's living wage. It also goes into issues such as water resilience and water stewardship, so important. And then finally, sustainable finance. How do we move private capital into areas that will result in, again, that force multiplier for investment in the SDGs?
Very soon, we will see the Summit of the Future here at UN headquarters. What is UN Global Compact's role in that?
Summit of the Future is going to be really important, I think, for re-energizing, of course, the private sector, but certainly refocusing globally on a couple of key issues and tenets of the summit. From the Global Compact angle, we will continue to mobilize the private sector. They're so key to these discussions, but also, the framing of the Summit of the Future, the multilateral system is so important to ensure trade, business, and investment continues. Digital tech and AI has been so important in looking at how business happens and business, grows and accelerates, but also looking at the continued business of the SDGs and what that means for the private sector. So we're really excited about this opportunity to sort of take a fresh look at what sustainable development looks like from a private sector angle as we approach 6 years, towards the SDG goal of 2030.
And as you approach 25 years of existence, what are you most optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the fact that CEOs, from around the world do see the SDGs as a North Star. They are keen to be able to align their business strategies with the SDGs, and they're keen to be able to make a contribution to the goals and the missions of the UN. Private sector is so critical to the functioning of countries and of economies, and I think when we see that CEO leadership and the strong contribution, it's important. We know what the problems are. I think what's most important for us is to be able to see how we can spread that knowledge, that awareness, and that desire for action even further. That keeps me optimistic.
So, Sanda, very recently, China's Ministry of Finance issued a draft sustainability reporting framework for companies in the country to have something to work toward by 2030. How important is it to have that kind of support at the government level?
I think it's great to be able to set standards on what corporate sustainability looks like. Globally, we're seeing a lot more focus on compliance, on regulation, on setting those standards, so that when we talk about being environmentally sustainable or being inclusive, it means the same, around the world. And it's been great to see the momentum in various countries setting their own corporate sustainability standards. So, we also applaud the work and the momentum that is building in China on this. I think the Global Compact there, because we do have a network and a liaison office, is very active in promoting adherence to standards, meeting standards, and going beyond compliance for our close to 1,000 business members that we have in country.
And you were recently in China working on the Belt and Road Initiative event there. Can you tell us what you accomplished there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we visited China to address a couple of key issues. We were tasked with preparing a set of principles by which businesses that work within the BRI should adhere to. These are principles looking at issues on rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. So we finished those publications and presented them to a business audience for those tools to be used again in the BRI work. We also worked on the GDI, the Global Development Initiative, that is also another platform that brings in private sector to invest in development, both domestically in country and externally. It's been great to be able to partner on that as well. And then with our businesses, we held roundtables with CEOs to look at how China is advancing on critical issues such as climate and energy transition and building an inclusive society.
Sanda Ojamba, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Coming up.
Human traffickers are targeting the youth in our community, not only in Solon Park, but in the surrounding areas, selling them with the idea of easy money.
UN Insider.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Globally, human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. Annually, an estimated 20 to 50 million people are exploited for forced labor, sex work, and organ harvesting. Children make up 35% of trafficking victims. The UN has set a goal to end all forms of violence against children, including trafficking, by 2030. At the border separating the U.S. and Mexico, trafficking is a profitable business. As Alistair Baverstock explains, organized crime also targets children in another way, by recruiting them to help in their activities.
Human smuggling here is a profitable business.
Desde los 12 años aprendí. Córrele, súbete, agáchate, mójate. Cruzabas los drenajes de la ciudad de nosotros y de la ciudad de Estados Unidos. Entonces, mi trabajo es recibirlos en México, ponerlos en Estados Unidos por mi método que yo tengo, que por obvias razones no voy a decirte, pero ya son muchos años. Hasta hoy todo ha salido bien. Vamos a suponer, puedes ganar unos $200,000 al año.
El Coyote says his services have never been more sought after. But once inside the United States undetected, the challenge for migrants is moving further into the country, and for that they need drivers. "2 a.m. in Sunland Park. Here, a driver is waiting for a call. As a GPS location is sent to his cell phone, he makes his way to the point on the map. With the coast clear, the migrants hiding nearby get into his truck, and within 3 minutes, the group are on the interstate, heading north. Javier Perea is the mayor of Sunland Park.
The issue of migrants crossing through our community has been in existence for many years. Even on my commute to work, I've seen where people, all of a sudden I see a car stop in the middle of the road, and then someone comes out from behind a tree or from a ditch and gets into the car.
Once inside the United States, from Sunland Park, the goal is to reach Denver, a 10-hour drive north inside the country, from where migration checks are less of a concern for the undocumented, and they can move on more freely. They may have slipped past Border Patrol, but 40 kilometers inland there's a checkpoint, and doing the driving is a criminal offence. Mario Carreon is a criminal attorney in Las Cruces, the nearest town to the checkpoint, where he says a lot of drivers get busted.
Regularly. I probably have 3, 4, 5 open cases of adults.
However, one recent investigation found that 1/4 of all the drivers picking up undocumented migrants and driving them further into the country are under the age of 18.
Todos son jóvenes, sí.
The human smugglers are recruiting American kids as young as 14 years old to skirt the legal penalties that would be applied to adults involved in their business. Javier says the problems of juveniles being contacted and recruited from his community, above all through social media, is a worsening problem.
Human traffickers are targeting the youth in our community, not only in Sunland Park, but in surrounding areas, selling them with the idea of easy money, also with the idea that if they get in trouble, nothing's going to really happen to them because they're minors.
And whether or not juvenile drivers will remain a target for recruitment and collaboration, these clandestine operations will continue as long as their migrant clients seek their services.
Tenemos que cambiar. Si ellos ponen algo más difícil, nosotros ponemos algo. Si ellos pusieron un muro alto, bueno, pues pongámonos por abajo.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider.